Greetings and welcome to the third part in the video series about the scrap boxes I picked up last November. In today's video we're going to take a look at all the AGP, PCI and ISA graphics cards that were in the haul. If you like retro graphics cards, this might be one you want to take a look at. Enjoy! Let's start with this potato right here. It's unmarked. I have no idea what this is. Look at this RAM brand though. It says Consumer. I love my Consumer branded RAM. Well, let's give it a try. Let's check out with Astra what this actually is. If I had to guess, I would say Riva TNT maybe? Riva TNT 2 M64? Ah! Completely on the money. After so many tests last time, I decided to reinstall the OS on my test bench. A minute later and I was able to install the NVIDIA driver that came bundled with the reference ISO. And it was functional, but when I tried to actually run 3D on it, I was met with this. And then I remembered, oh, it's a VIA board, so it's got buggy AGP, and I installed the AGP driver, and then it was completely fine. So we've got a working card, nice. Well, it's a nugget, but what can you do? Another potato, generic ATI Rage 128. The Rage 128 was really the generic workhorse card that ATI came up with at the time. It wasn't particularly fast, but it was reasonable. And they sold so well that I get flooded with these things, I swear to God. And yes, like the other ones I usually receive, it works completely fine, with zero problems. So here's another one, and another one, and another one. Yeah, I'll spare you the gory details here, but they're all working perfectly fine. Except this one has weird noise pattern on the video, but good enough. Here's the absolute last Rage 128 in that whole set, but this one is special because it's blue. Actually, the real reason why it's special is because it's a 128 Pro, not a 128. But I didn't notice that at the time. It also seems to be made by someone who isn't ATI. Because it's Hercules. We can't test this outright because it has two bad caps on there. Actually works. Cool stuff. And since it's a 128 Pro, I had to install a later driver than the one that I had used for the regular 128s. Wow, this one is much faster than the other one. Maybe this one is one I actually might want to keep sometime. So with those cards, we were in potato mode. But what if I told you we can go super potato mode? In '99, when the Rage 128 was coming out and people were buying that to boost their performance, why don't you buy an AGP card with a chip on it that's like 2 generations out of date? Here is not a Rage Pro Turbo AGP 2X or whatever. This is the potato of them all, the Rage 2C in AGP form with the color-coded VGA connector. So if you ever feel useless, just know that this card exists and you'll feel better immediately. Let's see if it works. Whoa, it works. Surprisingly, I don't have a driver for this included here. Oh, wow. I mean, it's technically running, I suppose. Perspective correction is struggling a wee bit. That's the ATI Rage experience. 640 by 480 maybe. Well, it went from 4 to 6 FPS. I'm very happy with that. Oh, 5 actually. Okay, screw that. So yeah, it is certainly a card. It's technically 3D capable, I suppose. I hear you asking, hey, what's better than one Rage 2C card? 2 of them! And yes, it also works. Next up we have another very generic looking card. This is a GeForce 2M X400, which is not as nuggety as the other cards, because GeForce 2M X400 was actually the price to performance king back in the day. you could get with some overclocking performance that closely rival the regular GeForce 2 at very, very reasonable prices. And today it's a very good choice to rejuvenate like an older AGP system. They were everywhere, and today you can get them very cheap for like €5 a piece. So if you really want an AGP graphics card in say like a K6 system, and don't want to shell out for an expensive GeForce 2 or like a Voodoo 3 card or something, this is definitely the way to go. And it also seems to work. And it should come as no surprise that it performs really well on 3D Mark 99. Great stuff, great little cards. Back then, could give the big guys a run for the money. And the bearing is good on the fan, which is the most surprising. But then again, it does look like it has been replaced before, because I see some heat shrink here. Not that I particularly mind it, saved me doing the work. Now here's another card that's not marked very well. I know this is an Nvidia card because it says Nvidia Corporation on the back there, but it doesn't actually have any indication as to what model this is. Since there's footprint for a DVI connection here, maybe this is an early Quadro model or something like that. Curious to see what this is, I have no clue. Ah, no. It's a GeForce 256! Okay. That is a lot rarer than the other cards and a lot more valuable. Wow, if that works, that would be the score of the day, probably. Okay, we're booted to Windows desktop. Fingers crossed here. Yeah, look at that. Fantastic. I'm shocked, guys. I have no words. Awesome. It's a GeForce 256 from the trash. What I want to do is I want to run hardware info quickly because I'm curious, since this is such a plain board, if there's a subsystem vendor that gives us an indication as to who made this card. Because, well, it was a high-end card at the time. I don't think there would be a no-name card. Well, this doesn't give us an indication. Ah, yeah, subsystem vendor is Nvidia as well. So maybe this is a reference PCB or something. Yeah. Oh, cool shit. This one will actually get an anti-static back, and it will go into my valuable cards box. Actually, let me just check if this is SDR or DDR. As a TC6, I would imagine that this is not a DDR card. It's not a DDR, it's an SDR card, but holy shit. Well, while we're on the subject of poorly marked Nvidia cards, here's another one. Also with a footprint for DVI. This is another GeForce 256. Well, it doesn't say, but what this PCB has that the other one doesn't, it has rounded edges. Look at that. I believe we did get lucky there. Oh, that fan bearing is shot. Ah, this one's a GeForce 2 MX. It's not a GeForce 256. And 3D Mark works. Good enough for me. I'll deal with the fan later. And so I dealt with the fan. Jesus, all that dirt. Bit of oil, doesn't take much. Well, it sounds like this bearing is EOL and we need a new fan on this one. But at least for now the card's gonna work. We do have another Nvidia card. This one isn't marked either on the PCB. However, we've got a chip exposure here. Nvidia Quadro 2 MXR. I have no idea what this is. Well, it's a Quadro, plainly. I don't know what performance class is it. It doesn't have a heatsink. Okay, this one fits perfectly, so let's just plop that in there. We don't get a BIOS sign on. That is suspicious. Drivers Quadro 2 MXR. Oh, would you look at that? Did it just freeze? I think it just froze. Well, I moved the mouse, but that shouldn't crash it. Oh dear lord, what happened here? Oh my god, what did we do? Can this be an indication as to why this thing was scrapped in the first place? Into the repair box it goes. Here we have another dusty card. Oh, that is a stock fan if I've ever seen one. Radiant 7500. I don't think I have one of those yet. Let's see. That fan is really struggling. Well, I'll unplug this fan then. Operates at 10 million rotations per second. And as is usual for the ATI drivers, I had to do some in-file hacking to remove the subsystem ID from this hardware ID string so that I could use this generic driver instead of hunting down a vendor-specific driver. Works nicely. Just need to fix that fan issue. And so, I went ahead and fixed the fan issue. Well. Not pretty, but unique, as we say. Well, I'd say that's a success. It's not very loud either. I'll file that as a success. It's the dawn of a new day, and here we have a Sapphire Radiant 7000 RV100 with a lovely codename Piglet. Driver editing was again necessary, and to no one's surprise, it also works just fine. If you thought this was the end of the potatoes, I've got news for you. Here's another one. It's a Matrox G200 AGP. These are really nothing special, but let's see if it works. It beeps, but there's no post. Actually, this is a common problem on these old Matrox cards. I believe there's some kind of bit rot in the BIOS that's involved or something similar. I don't really care because these cards are kind of useless. So let's move on. Next up is this Matrox Millennium G550 AGP with a funky VGA breakout connector and also a DVI on board. It's got 32 megs of SG RAM and it's a pretty decent performer for the time. The card came up just fine and the installation of the driver was not problematic at all, but running 3D Mark 99, it just crashed immediately. So I decided to check if the card works in principle using DXDiag. Testing Direct 3D and Direct Draw in DXDiag yielded positive results. So I decided to run 3D Mark 2000 afterwards, and well, that works fine. And then I tried 3D Mark 99 again, and now that also works. I have no idea what's going on here, but after so many years in this hobby, I don't ask this kind of questions anymore. Seemingly it works fine, but you may have seen some geometry issues popping up in the back there. And then on the second benchmark we get interesting geometry. So it doesn't look too good for this card, does it? But then I remembered I have this exact card already. So let's cross-check and see if it's a model-specific issue or if this particular card is broken. And to my surprise, it's got the exact same crashing problem on 3D Mark. And once you do get it going, well, it behaves exactly the same way as the other card. So I guess this is some kind of driver issue. Who knows? Who cares? Here we have another nugget. This is a Riva TNT2 again, but I can already notice there's some damage here. A capacitor has been ripped off. Seems like there was a resistor pack ripped off here. So this will need some work. Started first of all by cleaning up the solder pads left behind by the ripped off resistor pack. and applying fresh solder for later. .33 ohm resistor pegs are everywhere, so let's just steal one from this dead ASRock board. Flux the pads, apply heat, fixate position, and done. Perfect. Now with this capacitor issue, I decided to repair the original pads even though I don't have a surface mount capacitor to replace it. Use some copper tape, tin it to connect it to the rest of the copper traces that are still there, wick up the excess solder, clean up, and then apply UV curable solder mask, leaving the parts of the pads where a capacitor would solder to exposed. And then apply UV light. And of course do the same for the other pad. Plopped on a heatsink and time to test. And actually, first try, the card worked fine. No problems at all in 3D Mark 99. And just for good measure, I tested 3D Mark 2000 as well, without any problems either. Due to the brand image, Elsa cards do hold a bit more value than generic ones, so this was definitely worth it. From AGP to PCI, and let's get it started with the lowest of all the nuggets. This is a Trident TGUI 9440, which is a very basic 2D PCI graphics card, much in the vein of the earlier S3 Trios or S3 Visions. As expected, it works perfectly fine. It has 1 meg of VRAM, ideal I guess for a high-end 486 or low-end Pentium system. Around the same time, ATI had a similarly popular 2D accelerator card for PCI called the Max64, which we have right here. These usually are also very unproblematic, and so it's no surprise that it also passes the tests with flying colors. Just before we made the comparison to the S3 Trio, and well, here we have an S3 Trio. Surprisingly, this one has a color-coded VGA connector, which is unusual for a card of this age. And this one was made by Jinhua Systems. The card works perfectly and is really fast, as expected for an S3 Trio. I have to say, out of the PCI graphics cards we've had so far, this is the one I'd probably use in like a Pentium system. Of course, my life wouldn't be complete without fixing the one problem this card has, which is a missing screw nut. Now, we had our fair share of rage nuggets already, but here's a PCI one, and this is the all-in-wonder version, which is actually fairly collectible. It has video in and video out capabilities and has a slot for memory expansion. Now, as far as I recall, I never actually tried the video in capabilities on one of these. This doesn't look good at all. When the card's inserted, the postcard doesn't show any postcodes. I imagine something is wrong with this card, which makes it barf on the PCI buzz. And if experience is anything to go by, leaving this turned on for prolonged periods of time might be detrimental to the health of the chipset. There's a big scratch here that went all over these unpopulated pads, seemingly causing some of them to short. I don't think this would cause the problem of messing up the PCI bus, but just in case, let's clean up these pads and see if it changes anything. Nope, no good. Kinda sad about that actually, but this one has to go on the future repair pile. So here we have kind of a rare card again. This is an original Matrox Millennium. Didn't own this model of the card before. And to be honest, I don't really know much about Matrox graphics cards. But this one came out in 1996 and was one of the first 3D accelerator cards produced by Matrox. Or anyone for that matter. Now, because I'd seen this card in early 3D accelerator reviews that dealt specifically with direct 3D compatibility, I was under the assumption that this card would work fine with direct 3D, albeit without any kind of noteworthy 3D performance. Unfortunately, everything I tried related to 3D acceleration failed with the same type of error, something to do with not being able to use textures, or more specifically, not being able to enumerate the supported texture formats. I looked into this and I couldn't figure it out, but eventually my friend Micha from Retron.de tried it on his machine and he figured out that it actually does work if you use the DirectX version that Windows 98 ships with. Anything newer and it blows up in the same way. Oh well, good to know. Here's a bit of an oddball. This is definitely rarer looking. It's made by Creative Labs. It's a PCI graphics card with a small heatsink and a RAM expansion slot. So the model number CT6610. I have no idea what that is and I'm very lazy, so let's just plug it in and see. Oh, what an animation, wow. Isn't that the coolest VGA BIOS animation ever? Let's take a look at that again. Creative Graphics Blaster Extreme. That was the good era of technology. Apparently I already had the drivers installed for this, so that's good. Made it to the Windows desktop. Apparently it's a PerMedia 2 with 4 megs of VRAM. This is definitely a pretty rare card, but it's also very old and predates 3D Mark 99 by 2 years. So I doubt the fact that we were able to get any performance out of it. And here's the problem I had with this card. After installing the driver, 3D Mark was no longer able to run. I tried reinstalling 3D Mark and that didn't help either. Let's take a look at the replay to see exactly where I screwed up. Right there, I should have clicked yes instead of no. Apparently the driver overwrote msvcrt.dll, which is an integral component of the Microsoft Visual C runtime. I think it's an absolute no-go that driver files overwrite important system files just like that, but here we are. As a hack, I added the original versions of the files to the Windows 98 install file /cd-rom directory. If you add a system file to this directory, it will always take precedence over any other source of this file, be it the driver itself or the Windows 98 CD. And then I just reinstall the driver since the driver obviously wants to install that file. And after doing so, I was finally able to run 3D Mark 99 again. Well, I say run, I mean more like crawl. I am, however, mildly impressed considering the age of this card that it manages to render this somewhat correctly. Oh, did I say correctly? Never mind. Now we're truly entering the space age. Here's an ISA graphics card with a chip made by Laser. I was unable to find anything about this manufacturer or this chip. I just know it exists and that I have it. Not much more to say about it, so let's just see if it works. Well, it sort of works. It's very, very slow, and there's a color channel missing. It's a very cyan tint. Wow, look at that speed, man. I'd like to remind you that this is Doom running on a Pentium 3 700 MHz. A common fault on these is that the inductors that are in series with the RGB signals go bad, and I was about to check those, but then I noticed this. Well, there's your problem. Jeez. This card actually works fine, but I have to say, I do think this is the slowest VGA card that I own. But hey, I guess putting it in a 386 or 286 machine would probably do it some good. Okay, this is the very last card in this lot. And it's by far the most perplexing one. I couldn't tell you what this is at all. It's an AGP card, I know that much. The true nature of this card is hidden behind this sticker here. It has a lot of LCD and TV related connections there, and jumpers and dip settings, and I have no clue what to expect. So let's just see if it works and then find out what it is later. Oh, the card does work, and this is truly perplexing. It's an S3 Verge MX Plus. It's an AGP card. First time I've ever seen an S3 Verge on AGP. And finding a driver for this was also not trivial. Had to dig a bit deeper than usual this time around, but I managed to find it. Wow, so many options regarding display output. There's also an option called dual controller, and I have no idea what that does. Not sure how that would work considering it's AGP, and I don't think there's a single motherboard with 2 AGP slots. There were some problems with getting 3D applications to work, but with enough persistence it's absolutely possible, and... well, yeah. Texture filtering? Who's that? Never heard of him. Also, it's a tiny bit broken, but actually the frame rate is a lot better than I would have expected from an S3 Verge. Especially on the second test, where I would totally expect it to bog down completely. I mean, it does have the usual lighting and texture issues, but it doesn't run too bad. I think we can all agree on the fact that this is definitely one of the video cards ever made. This is the entirety of graphics and sound cards that I pulled out of this lot. I think it was definitely worth every penny. Lots of oddities, rarities, extremely good stuff in there. I really can't complain, and I really love doing this, and I will definitely keep getting scrap boxes in and see what kind of treasures I can pull out from that. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will definitely see you in part 4 coming very soon. Bye!